It's not about being the best, but about the connection that people have with their bodies. It feels very intimate and raw, and probably makes it the only sports magazine I'll ever read. Hi, and welcome to my living room, the place where I read all of my magazines. My name is Fiona, and I'm a huge indie magazine fan. I'm also a writer and editor working in the spheres of fashion and beauty. Welcome to Touch Some Mags, the series where I introduce you, my beloved listener, to one indie magazine and one indie magazine maker per episode. As you might have guessed, this is my first video, but we all have to start somewhere, right? I've had this idea for this series for almost 2 years now, and I finally decided to just do it. So I hope you have made yourself cozy, because for my first episode, I want to introduce you to a very special magazine. The Movement, created by Editor-in-Chief Ellie Jackson. For this video, I spoke to Ellie Jackson about the magazine, its values, and the ideas behind it. You'll hear parts of the interview throughout this video. The Movement is an independent sports magazine, but it's really not the kind that you would expect. Because usually sports magazines are bright and flashy, and it's always, or most of the time, about men. However, this one isn't, which is probably the reason why I picked it up, and the fact that it also doesn't exclusively cover sports. As the name already suggests, this magazine is about movement. The movement takes away the usual competitiveness and exclusivity that sports and its coverage usually bring with them. So instead of stats and records, you'll find stories. Stories about people, communities, how moving their bodies connects them to themselves and to others. It's made by and for women, queer, non-binary, and trans people. It celebrates movement and bodies in all of their forms.
Back in 2020, I started working on a magazine. It was actually with a guy that I'd met in the world of publishing, and started making a magazine about sport. And when I started doing that, the problem appeared very, very quickly that everything was kind of made by a guy. And we were doing women in sports stories, and it still happens to this day. It's women in sports, and then you look at the creds and it's just a list of men's names. And I was realizing that women's stories were always told through the lens of the male gaze or male teams. Not that those teams aren't great at what they do and empathetic and good storytellers, but there was a real interesting problem where women's storytelling wasn't really happening in the sports space. And so I realized that if I was going to make another sports magazine, I just didn't want to add to that problem. I wanted to create a solution.
As someone who doesn't usually pick up sports media, this magazine sparked my interest precisely because it's not about being the best, but about the connection that people have with their bodies. The way this is communicated through the graphics and through the photography, it feels very intimate and raw, and probably makes it the only sports magazine I'll ever read.
It was never going to be pink. I mean, again, when the first iterations of the sports magazine for women came out, it was all pink, and I was, we don't want this version of sport that's feminized. What does that even mean? Sport, it's not even just sport. That was the other thing. We wanted it to be movement. I wanted it to feel beautiful, but quite genderless, even though it's a project about gender. At this time, I was living in East London and swimming at the reservoir in Stoke Newington. In terms of the brand direction, I really wanted it to be something that I could just see women having in their swim bags and reading it after a few laps. I just wanted it to just feel a natural lifestyle piece that felt like something beautiful.
Ellie's working on reimagining what sports coverage can look like. It is about telling stories that otherwise wouldn't be heard, and about changing the way we perceive sports coverage altogether. The first issue, issue 00, came out in 2022. It included a manifesto outlining what they stand for and what they want to create with this project. Issue 01 was published in 2024. Both issues are beautifully designed, visually strong, and leave room for what matters: the words, the stories, the people. And what I love so much about this magazine, it's not about showing off. Instead of glossy, bright imagery, the photography feels like we just shadowed the people for a day, like we're watching a documentary unfold in print. The movement is very intimate and very raw. It invites you into each person's world without over-editing.
A lot of the photographers are really documentary style. A really great part of indie mags is photographers can come and try stuff out or do the type of photography that they love, but they don't get commissions to do that much. Particularly expensive medium format film photography, that kind of stuff happens a lot in the mag because it's a special thing that you never really do with the client, but it's, you know, like a really special practice. So yeah, I would say it's the nature of the project. It's always been like, we can't really pay people that much, but we kind of want to work collaboratively. And the other thing about it as well is this like defiance against sports media, again, like the really classic sports media, which, you know, was 98% men, or no, I think it was 92% male made when we started the mag. And it's always really glossy, it's really shiny, it's for real. It's still a real conscious decision to make sure it looks as little sports photography as we can make it look.
Most importantly, especially when showing women and queer folk, it doesn't objectify the bodies. As we know, this is a huge problem, and so many other media still fail at this. And this is what the movement does so well. It portrays people as people. And this is so truly refreshing, and hopefully one day this will become the standard. Talking about standards, to date, most sports coverage remains male-dominated. From 2023 to 2024, women's sports made up only 20% of sports media coverage. So the movement isn't just a magazine. It's a project actively working to balance that out. It gives a platform to voices that rarely get heard, while making movement feel human again.
Now I'm looking at the next one coming out. It was going to be this year, but then I did a rebrand, and now I'm actually sitting down to kind of do a new strategy project on the project and think about the magazine in a more grown-up way going forward, and putting budgets down for it for the first time, which I've never really done before. It's massively changed my career. I do mostly, so my personal career is a creative director, creative lead in advertising and branding, and also journalism. And I now mostly work on sports projects. It's become clear to me that sports stories are the most important stories to tell for me. But even now, 3 or 4 years on, the movement is still so important. And I feel since 2020, we had this real surge in women's sports and women's stories, and then it kind of petered off again. And now I feel it's more important than ever. And even this week, looking at projects, beautiful projects by other people, and then you look at the creds and it's a woman's story told by loads of men, and it's still a really, really important idea.
The movement makes room for nuance. I find it so tender and at the same time so defiant. It looks at bodies without objectifying them, at movement without glorifying the competitiveness behind the sports. It asks softer, more human questions and challenges how we've been taught to look at sports altogether. And in that, this is such a fitting magazine for the first episode of this series. It embodies everything I love about indie magazines and indie publishing. They're a refusal to follow the traditional script. They're a commitment to representation and a belief that storytelling isn't about being the best, but about being present. As Ellie writes in the editor's letter of issue 01, sometimes it's not about coming first or breaking a record. It's about continuing, about moving forward one step at a time. So that's the movement for you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see what Ellie creates in issue 02. And until then, please get out of my living room. You have been here long enough.